This video is made possible by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain website or online store, make it with Squarespace. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial. You'll also find a link in the description below. Gilles de Rais was a knight who became the richest man in all of France. He became famous after battling alongside Joan of Arc in the name of God, and he was well loved by the French people. No one could have imagined that just a few years later he would be sentenced to death for summoning a demon and murdering over 100 children. For hundreds of years, he was considered to be one of the first serial killers in recorded history. However, some modern-day historians believe that he was framed and they are trying to exonerate him. So, did he really kill innocent children as part of a satanic sacrifice, or is he one of the most misunderstood figures in all of history? Gilles de Rais was born in his family castle, the Champtos-sur-Loire, in 1405. When he was a child, Gilles de Rais' parents passed away, and he was raised by his grandfather, Jean de Cran. Gilles de Rais was born during the 100 Years' War, which was a conflict between the noble families of England and France. It began in 1337 and ended in 1453, meaning that the war went on for 116 years. Multiple generations grew up in non-stop warfare. Kidnapping, death, and torture just became a part of normal life. Considering how dangerous it was at that time, it became mandatory for all men in noble families to be trained in combat and warfare. At 16 years old, Gilles de Rais rescued the Duke of Brittany, who had been kidnapped and taken prisoner. As a reward for saving the Duke, the king awarded Gilles de Rais land grants that allowed him to acquire massive properties for free. Since he was 12 years old, Gilles' grandfather, Jean, was already trying to arrange a marriage for the boy. His first attempt was with a young heiress who was only 4 years old. After trying and failing to arrange a marriage for his grandson a few times, Jean de Cran was able to broker an agreement with the noble families in Brittany, since Gilles saved their duke's life. When he was in his early 20s, Gilles de Rais married Catherine de Thouars, Duchess of Brittany. She was the heiress to one of the biggest fortunes in all of France. Back then, women could not own or handle money, so estates were controlled by fathers and husbands. So, as to the heir of one of the biggest fortunes in France from the de Rais family, marrying Catherine de Thouars made them one of the richest couples in the entire country. Nearly everyone has heard the story of Joan of Arc, but it's important to remind you of her tale because her fate shows so many parallels to Gilles de Rais. The French city of Orléans had been surrounded and captured by the English. Joan of Arc was just a 17-year-old peasant girl when she appeared before King Charles VII and requested to use his army to defeat the English and free Orléans. It's hard to imagine how such a young woman without any noble status could have had an audience with the king, let alone get him to agree to hand over an army, but apparently she was very convincing. Joan claimed that Michael the Archangel appeared to her in a vision and that God was on her side. She also claimed that she could miraculously heal her wounds. She demonstrated before the court that even the deepest wounds would heal with the power of God. She claimed that he was helping her attain supernatural powers in order to become invincible. Some documents actually claim that the king was actually terrified of Joan and that he was practically forced to say yes. Gilles de Rais was 25 years old at the time. He became the Marshal of the army and Joan of Arc's right-hand man. In just 9 days, the two of them led the army to victory for France, and they became national heroes and holy figures in society. The fact that they fought in the name of God and the Archangel Michael was enough to reinvigorate French citizens' Catholic faith. As you might imagine, it was extremely humiliating for the English to know that they were defeated by a teenage girl. When she was just 19 years old, Joan of Arc was captured by the Burgundian party, who were a group of French noblemen spying for the English. She was taken to court in England, and in 1431 she was burned at the stake for witchcraft. Her memory lived on in the hearts of the French people, and she was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. The Burgundian party managed to kill a peasant girl like Joan of Arc, but it was far more difficult to capture a well-protected noble person like Gilles de Rais. He became the Marshal of France, and he was even more rich and powerful than he was before because he also received awards for winning the Siege of Orleans. He was also able to strike business deals with other nobles who wanted to work with him. His court grew to be even more luxurious than the King of France and the wealthy leaders of the Catholic Church. He decided to retire from fighting at this point. He was still very young and had all the money in the world to do essentially whatever he wanted with. Just like today when people get a windfall of money at a very early age, they sometimes make some stupid decisions on how to spend it. Sports cars and designer watches hadn't been invented yet, but he did invest in several different estates. Since this was investing in real estate, his family found these kinds of purchases to be acceptable, but it started to get a little crazy when Gilles de Rais began producing plays. He spent a small fortune on theatrical reenactments of his battles during the 100 Years' War. Today, producing multi-million-dollar Broadway plays and movies are completely normal, but back then, it was completely unheard of. His play had over 150 speaking roles and over 500 extras who acted as soldiers in the battle. 600 different costumes were commissioned for the performance, and tailors around Orleans were working around the clock to make them. He also gave his staff and even the audience an unlimited buffet of free food, which pretty much guaranteed that everyone in town would show up to the performance. In his own way, he was actually creating jobs and making people happy by entertaining and feeding the peasant class. But from the perspective of his family, this was horrifying. His in-laws in Brittany spent multiple generations saving and investing so that they had a family legacy, and it was sickening to them that this young man was practically burning cash in a garbage fire. But of course, it was Gilles de Rais' money, and he had every right to spend it however he wanted. Gilles de Rais began paying for his own personal chapel on his estate. This might seem strange, but it wasn't actually that uncommon for members of the European nobility to have their own church back in the day. This way he could still attend Mass and do it from the comfort of his own home. It was called Chapel of the Holy Innocents, named after a verse in the book of Matthew. In this verse, King Herod orders a mass killing of all children under 2 years old to prevent a prophecy from coming true that a child would grow up to overthrow him. From a modern perspective, it seems rather creepy that Gilles de Rais would want a church named after a story about the murder of thousands of children, but some historians say that it's exactly the opposite. In the 1400s, the story actually became popular among the French Catholic community. People were making a comparison to the tragedy of these dying children in the Bible to the 100 Years' War because there were entire generations of people who grew up without knowing a time of peace. It was finally becoming in vogue to be a pacifist. By naming his personal church the Chapel of the Holy Innocents, he was actually making a political statement that he wanted the 100 Years' War to be over. Considering that many of the noble families profited from constant warfare and capturing territories, this was even more reason for his in-laws to be angry with him. The Duke of Brittany appeared before the Pope claiming that Gilles de Rais had an addiction to spending money. He requested that the Pope would deny his application to have the Chapel of the Innocents accepted as an official part of the Catholic diocese. The Duke hoped that a rejection would be enough to stop Gilles de Rais from completing the chapel, but he went ahead and built it anyway. Even though his church did not have a real Catholic priest there to say Mass, Gilles de Rais didn't let that stop him. He had tailors custom make lavish and colourful costumes for him to wear, and he officiated Mass himself. This was considered to be extremely blasphemous, and he was making a very public statement that he knew that he had just as much power as the king and the Catholic Church, and there was pretty much nothing they could do to stop him. His family met with the king, asking for a royal decree to stop anyone from entering into a contract with Gilles de Rais. They claimed they were afraid he would spend all of his money and that there would be nothing left in his estate. The king agreed to allow the Duke of Brittany to take control over Gilles de Rais' estate. The Duke of Brittany began making financial decisions on his behalf, and he completely cut off Gilles de Rais from all of his money. After looking over his financial records, the Duke told Gilles de Rais that he had spent everything he owned and that he was now in debt. So he therefore began selling his properties one by one. Later, Gilles de Rais learns that one of his favourite castles that the Duke had apparently sold was actually being guarded by a Catholic clergyman named Jean Le Ferrand, and that no one was actually living there at all. He was incredibly angry about this. He wasn't going to stand for the Duke trying to make him both penniless and homeless. He wanted to go back inside, so he beat and kidnapped Jean Le Ferrand in order to get the new keys to the castle. Kidnapping a clergyman was a very serious crime. He did eventually let the man go, but in the eyes of the noble community, it was extremely shocking that Gilles de Rais would do such a thing. It was becoming clear to both the king and the pope that Gilles de Rais was not going to go down without a fight. He was so powerful, he could get away with just about anything and stay out of jail. The French people loved him for being a hero and for his generosity to the peasant classes. If he wanted to, he even had the ability to raise his own army. This was a very scary thing for the powers that be, and they needed to stop it. Now, just before we get into the darker part of this story, where he apparently starts killing people, I do want to tell you about today's sponsor. And I know that having the sponsor in the middle of the video is not the most awesome thing, but these videos are very long, and given the length that we put out, I really hope you do appreciate the need to put the sponsorships in the middle, but I will keep it super brief. Squarespace allows you to create a powerful online presence, whether that's for a personal site, a business, or something else entirely. It all starts on Squarespace with a beautiful template that comes with the requisite cool names like Pursuit and Royce. You can either start from scratch or easily move over an existing domain, making everything super easy to manage. And once you're through the super easy customization process, there's no updates, no patches, none of that stuff you have to deal with when you're making a website on another platform, all that super frustrating stuff. Look, if you're looking to start a business, pursue a dream, whatever, just do it with Squarespace. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to go launch, go to squarespace.com/biographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Do keep in mind, going through that link helps us keep making these videos. All right, let's talk about some killing. Gilles de Rais' family began circulating rumors that he had gone mad and that he was experimenting with alchemy. Even if this was true, alchemy was very misunderstood. This wasn't a form of witchcraft. It was actually a very early form of chemistry. Years later, other monarchs like Queen Elizabeth I would hire alchemists as well, but according to this rumor, he was taking those alchemist practices one step too far, taking them into the occult, and that it actually sold his soul to the devil. He partnered with an Italian man named Francois Prelati, who was rumored to also be an alchemist. Some even say that the two men were in a forbidden romantic relationship and that they both attempted to summon a demon named Baron. They said that Baron would be able to make gold appear out of thin air. After trying 3 times and failing, Francois Prelati apparently told Gilles de Rais that if they wanted to make the spell work, there would need to be human sacrifice. As the story goes, Gilles de Rais lured children to his castle with the goal of killing them in a ritualistic sacrifice. In the 15th century, children would walk the streets alone and go missing all the time. We now know that young kids should never walk a city street unsupervised, but at that time, parents wanted someone else to blame when their child disappeared. Back then, it was impossible for people to fathom that even Catholic priests were actually pedophiles who were responsible for many of the disappearances. For the citizens of a deeply religious Catholic nation, it was actually easier for people to believe that one devil-worshipping, serial-killing alchemist was responsible for the deaths of all the missing children in France. According to the story, Gilles de Rais would bring in young boys to the castle with the promises of making them his page or his squire, honored to have their son work with one of the most famous knights in the country, and they wouldn't think twice about letting their son leave with a stranger on a horse. The boy, however, had never come back. The court claimed that he would decapitate the children, collect their heads on stakes, and ask his house guests which one they thought was the most beautiful. He grew tired of collecting heads and began sacrificing these children on a satanic altar, allowing the rotting bodies to pile up and sometimes burning the corpses in the fireplace. After he was accused of worshipping Satan and killing children, Gilles de Rais and all his servants denied the claims. His friends also came forward and testified on his behalf, saying that this was all a lie and that they never saw anything at all like that in his castle. But their testimonies, they were left out of the trial. After enduring physical torture, they finally signed confessions to a story that had been written about their crimes. Beyond these signed confessions, there was never any physical proof that any of this actually ever happened. In 1440, Gilles de Rais was convicted of witchcraft and murder. He was executed on October the 16th of that year. The Duke of Brittany gained control over all of his money and land and divided it among his family. The king even gave him permission to take possession of any former lands that had been sold to pay for Gilles de Rais' debts. The Catholic Church also got a huge chunk of money from this donation. Some say that Gilles de Rais' body was burned after hanging, which was the procedure for anyone accused of witchcraft. However, the Gutenberg Project, which studies various witchcraft cases throughout history, says that they found evidence that he was actually given a Christian burial. This was kept a secret because it would prove that the clergy completely made up the accusations of witchcraft and devil worship. This story was so shocking and salacious among the French people, it was hard to believe that anyone could make up such a story about anyone. To them, it felt like they were duped into trusting a wolf in sheep's clothing. The story was told over and over again, and it just became a part of French folklore. The story sends the message that with enough money and enough power, the aristocracy can get away with anything, and that the common people must seek justice for inequality. Hanging Gilles de Rais became like a victory for the people in the peasant classes, and many people still believe to this very day that the story they've been told is the truth. While it's true that Gilles de Rais confessed to the murders, it was only after torturing him and threatening to excommunicate him from France. They never discovered any bodies of children on his property. Even if they were burned, there would still be bone fragments somewhere there. All of the evidence, it was circumstantial, and it would never hold up in a court of law today. In 1992, the New York Times reported about the possibility of reopening the case of Gilles de Rais. Many French historians got very defensive about the case, saying that he was truly an awful serial killer and that it's not possible that anyone would be falsely accused of something so horrific. For years, a woman named Margot K. Juby collected nearly every book that had been published with information about Gilles de Rais. She went as far as to translate the original trial documents from Latin and read all of the biographies in both French and English. She even discovered that the transcripts were also altered after the trial was over, changing Gilles de Rais' testimony to sound even more over the top, adding even more gruesome details to his supposed confession about slaughtering children. Juby wrote her own biography on Gilles de Rais and held a public retrial on his behalf. She proved that if the same trial happened today, there would never be enough evidence to convict him of murder. For some, this was enough to officially exonerate him. For others, they will never be able to let go of the idea that Gilles de Rais was one of the worst serial killers who ever lived. So I hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos twice a week. Also, as I mentioned, do check out our sponsor, Squarespace. You'll find a link to them in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching.